Hi, I'm Heather Hubbard. I went from being a lawyer and partner at one of the largest firms in America to becoming an online personality and successful entrepreneur. I know what it takes to rise to the top. I also know all too well the toll it can take on your health and personal life. So how do you shine bright without burning out? How do you chase joy while achieving success? You're listening to the Hustle and Flow podcast. Welcome back to Hustle and Flow. I am your host, Heather Hubbard, and we are on episode 266. And today is all about whether or not you should be scaling your business. For a long time, I was obsessed with scaling because I'm a high achiever. And, whether you want to or not, whether you try to stay focused on your own success or not, it is so easy to fall into the trap of really going after whatever goals seem to make sense in your industry. So as a business owner, as an entrepreneur, there is a lot of discussion and conversation around scaling. There is a book that I have read 5 million times called Scaling Up. And I just was, really trying to plan, really trying to be intentional and scaling the business. Also, I am in the online business industry. And that too is something where the conversation just seems to revolve around scaling. Are you scaling your business? How to scale your business? And that is what you're supposed to do. So as a high achiever, when there is something out there that it's like, oh, this is what I'm supposed to achieve, this is the next thing, then it is so easy to just do that and to go after that. I don't think I had ever really heard that scaling isn't for everyone. And as I was scaling my business, I was forced to actually take a step back because of health issues. And it was when I was starting to decide how am I going to rebuild the business because I had that blank slate that I thought, well, how do I want to do it? How do I really want to do it? And turns out I don't want to scale it, not in the way that I thought I did before. And so as I am just seeing so many discussions online right now around and getting these ads around scaling your business, I thought, I should do a podcast that shares the arguments for why you should not scale your business, or at least outlines what you should be considering in terms of, do you want to scale your business or not? Because not every business is meant to be scaled. So let's talk about it. First and foremost, scaling does not equal success. I think we naturally tend to reach out to these external markers to determine, am I successful? And so, at least in the industries and in the online business industry that I'm in, a lot of the very common markers of success include things that seem real, but in many ways are not. So here's what I mean. Vanity metrics, like how many followers do you have? Whether it's on Instagram, Facebook, TikTok. LinkedIn is not quite the same. But for LinkedIn, or even some of the other social media platforms, it's, well, how much engagement do you get? How many likes do you have, even if you don't have a lot of followers? How many people are on your email list? How many people are downloading and listening to your podcast? These are metrics that may or may not be important, but in our industry, it's all about, well, what are the numbers? What are the numbers? And the bigger, the better. Also, the size, right? It's like the size of your list, the size of your launch. 7-figure is a big buzzword, right? So it's, have you had a 7-figure launch? Do you have a 7-figure business? And it's really, really interesting because the way people define that is very different. So I recently learned and realized that some people claim to have a 7-figure business once the business has generated 7 figures, period, like ever. What? This was news to me because someone told me they were a seven-figure business, but then they were telling me about like their revenue for the year. And I'm like, well, I thought you were a seven-figure business. And they were like, yeah, I've made seven figures over the life of the business. And I'm like, okay. Like I did not realize that this is how we were calculating this now. Um, yeah. So anyway, but even when people say they are a seven-figure business, if it means you're seven figures in one year, that does not mean that they necessarily have a seven-figure salary. In fact, I think I've talked about this on a previous episode. If like there's a big difference with profit. You can be a seven-figure business and not actually have much, if any, profit at all. So we throw around these numbers that are like the goals or the metrics, but they don't necessarily equate to what we all think it means, which is you're making lots of money that you are taking home with you that you can personally invest and spend. So that's one metric. Again, it's the bigger the better. But then there's this whole scaling concept of, are you scaling your business? How big is your team? And how much are you not in the business? And for many, many years, I thought that I wanted a really big company because I wanted to have big impact, and significance is important to me. And I just tend to be a competitive person. I'm a high achiever. So it's like you just go for the thing that you think you need and want. So in 2020, before I, pivoted and then stepped back, I had a big team. I had a big year. I was definitely scaling, right? Um, by all of the metrics that would be important, I was scaling, I was hitting the numbers. And I did have decent profit for sure. I was paying myself, but there were a lot of headaches that came with it that I was not prepared for, that I did not realize would happen. And I actually was speaking with my CFO when he was sharing, this is actually something that I wish more people would talk about because not every entrepreneur is meant to scale. Not every business is meant to be scaled. So, what I want to share with you today is what businesses I think are ripe for scaling, which ones absolutely should not be scaled, and what to look out for. Like, what are some of the pitfalls that can happen if you scale? Because I don't think we talk about them. And I think it is important for you to know because it allows you to make a better, more informed decision about whether or not that should be a metric or a goal for you. Okay, so the first thing that I learned that I was not prepared for is it's that things break. When you start to scale, things break. When you are doing things on your own or it's a really small team, or like you don't have a bunch of independent contractors, you don't have a lot of others who are actually having to deliver the service. It's pretty small, and so you kind of just know how to do things. But as you add people on and as you have more team members and essentially more clients, you have to have better systems. And when you have to have better systems, it requires a lot of work, which is another point, but things break because it's one thing when it's in your mind, it's another when it's like a written process, or suddenly you're having to rely on a lot more software than you ever did before. Things will go wrong and things break. And so you end up spending a lot of time actually just trying to fix the tech and the customer service and the systems that are needed to actually allow all of these different people to run a bigger, more scaled business. Number two, you have to become the CEO and the manager. When you are an entrepreneur and you're doing a lot of it yourself, and then you start to grow it such that other people are helping and you're not as in the business, basically your role changes. So you get a new hat. And unless you can hire a CEO, then you are still the CEO. And most people, as they're scaling, they're not yet in a position to hire the CEO. And if you are hiring that CEO, you're getting ready to give away a lot of money. So that CEO is then suddenly having to really perform in order to cover the revenue and and their own salary. And if that doesn't happen, then you're resentful of the CEO. So it definitely creates this whole thing where you are no longer you're like maybe no longer the service provider or whatever role it is that you want. So my favorite role in my business personally is to be a creative. I love to create ideas. I love to create marketing campaigns. I enjoy creating copy and visuals. Now, I don't always need to be in the weeds on all of that, but I think a lot of my original success was because my voice was shining through, and I was in this place where I could create experiences. I could create the podcast, in that I could really show up and think through the strategy of what I thought someone would want to hear or would need to hear and how that supported, a particular business line. When the business began to scale, when I had a lot of independent contractors, and I was really trying to make sure that the same service was being delivered, that the clients were still happy, that it was the same quality, the same caliber, but I was no longer in it as much. Basically, that turned me into a manager. And I know how to do that. I did that role before. When I was in my law firm, I wasn't only a practicing lawyer, I was a manager and a leader. And I'll be honest, I loved that there. I actually found some of the management and leadership stuff far more fun and interesting than practicing law. But part of starting my own business was because I wanted the creative outlet. I wanted to be able to really envision and create the business side of things. So when I then had to be a full-time manager and more of a manager than a creative, it started to suck the fun out of the business, and it started to keep me from really being able to be a creative because I wasn't as connected to the client service. And I was really just having to answer a lot of questions and put out a lot of fires and think ahead in terms of operations and systems. And operations and systems are not fun for me. Now, they're fun for some people, they're not fun for me. And so there came a point when it was just like, well, if I'm going to be a CEO, if I'm going to be a manager, frankly, I would rather go do it in a Fortune 500 company or do it in a law firm. So the third one is you lose control and autonomy. I am a control freak. I like to do things. And I think it kind of goes with the concept of what do you want your role to be in the business? Because I am a huge fan of productivity and efficiency. And I have shared before, the concept of what's a $10 task versus a $100 task versus 1,000 or 10,000. And you really should be focused on the $10,000 tasks because otherwise, like you're holding the business back. But also, sometimes for those of us who are scrappy, it's one thing to actually hire it out because it makes more sense for the business, even if you're scrappy. But it's another thing when like you actually enjoy it. And so if doing the $10,000 tasks all the time don't bring you joy, then sometimes you got to go back and revisit those smaller tasks because that does bring you joy. And so when you are only at the $10,000 level and that does not bring you joy, then that can create a scaling issue. The margins also become thinner before they get bigger. And this is the conversation I was having with my CEO, my CFO, which is a fractional CFO. When you have to start hiring team members, if they cannot pay for themselves, and unless they are a service provider that you are billing out, then they cannot pay for themselves, right? So if it's an operations thing, they're not necessarily going to pay for themselves at the beginning. And so you have to get the business to a certain level before that makes sense for the team size that you need to scale. I think a lot of people avoid hiring people on the front end, and that's a mistake because it actually can help you. But there is a point where growing is going to hurt a little bit. And, he said it was really between that 250 and 1 million mark of revenue in a single year. So when you go to scale beyond 250 and you start to really try to hire that team out, getting from there to a million, it can hurt a lot because the margins really do get a lot thinner and you feel like you're losing control and autonomy and you feel like you are just managing all the time and you're no longer getting to do what you love. And there becomes a point where it's just like, well, what am I doing? Like, I started this business so I could have autonomy and freedom. I started this business so I could have more of the financial profit, more of the margin. I started this business because of what I love to do. And so sometimes when you get in that rat race of scaling, you can easily find yourself losing all of those things and wondering, what have I done? And that's when you tend to want to burn it down. But here's the issue. When you then want to burn it down, it's actually much harder to unwind that. It's much harder to move that ship when you're smaller and you're kind of just like in the canoe or the rowboat by yourself. You can easily turn it on a dime. But when you start to move a bigger ship or you're starting to move like the Titanic, trying to get everyone on board, trying to get the whole thing moved and pivoting, it's not as easy to do. More people are impacted. There are more opinions, there are more emotions, and there are more systems. It just takes so much more. So as you tend to grow and as you get bigger, it's much harder to actually implement change. And with that comes pressure. With that comes pressure because it's no longer the pressure to just perform and pay your own bills. It's the pressure to perform and pay your team's bills. It's the pressure to perform and continue to grow in the eyes of everyone in the industry or your clients. So there really is this concept that we don't talk about where we always expect to be growing our businesses. Similar to a career, we always expect to get promotions and raises. And yes, when you're getting a promotion and a raise, it gets harder at the top. Sometimes there's not as many that can succeed, but at the end of the day, you can only do your best, and it's really up to management or whatever to decide whether or not you get that promotion or you get that raise. When you own your own business, when you are the entrepreneur, the pressure is really on you because for your team members to continue to get raises and to get bonuses, you have to bring in more revenue or you have to just give up some of your own salary. And similarly, when you have off years, the pressure is still on you. And I think that there's also a lot of ego involved because we're humans and we're high achievers. And so if you go backwards, it's not just the financial aspect of that. We start to think we're failing or we're not doing as good. And so, yeah, I feel like scaling actually has a lot of pressure and burdens with it that we just don't talk about. With all of that in mind, let's talk about who scaling is for and who it's not for, because it is for some people, and I don't want to actually indicate it's not. I just think being really honest about when and where to invest can be really helpful as you are trying to scale your own business or figure out whether or not you don't need to scale at all. So let's actually start with who should not scale, because I've already given the pitfalls. And so I think it should be rather obvious, but let's go through it. And then we'll move to who should scale. If you love to provide the services that you offer, right? So let's say you're a lawyer. I work with a lot of lawyers, and you love practicing law, then you may or may not want to scale. If you are an online service provider, If you are a speaker, right? Like you love to go out and speak and you love to lead workshops. If you are a coach and you love to actually coach people, when we go to scale, the concept is, well, let me hire more lawyers for my firm. Let me hire more paralegals for my firm. If you are a speaker or a workshop facilitator, it's let me hire more often independent contractors. Let me get more speakers. Let me get more people who can come in and actually lead the workshops because I'm limited. Like I can only lead so many. So let me have more people come in that can be independent contractors. I can train them on how to lead these workshops and then they can go lead the workshops. Another way to scale, if you're a speaker, would be to say, let me certify. So if I have a specific model that I use or a framework that I use that's really successful, and I have name recognition or trademark brand recognition, then I might want to certify, like I'll train and certify other trainers who can then go out, market and sell on their own, but either give me or a fee or a percentage of revenue. There's a few different ways that you can set up the certifications. So, like, that would be a way to scale. If you're coaching, you either would hire more coaches to come in to help, you could bring in facilitators, or you move to more group coaching programming. So, as opposed to one on one, you might say, let me have group coaching where it allows me to have more people at the same time. So, in each of those situations, if you were a lawyer and you now have, let's say, you've got an assistant and you've got a few paralegals and you've got multiple attorneys, you have to manage all of those people. And depending on whether or not you have an office or you're remote, you've got to handle all of the support. You have to handle all of the systems. You have to handle all of the licensing. You have to handle the rent. Like you're handling all of that. The team morale. You are not just in charge of providing the services as a lawyer. You're now having to make the firm run. And you can hire an office manager, you can hire other people, but essentially at the end of the day, you're still in charge of them and they're meeting with you. So that is still going to create, right, some of those scaling issues. And so if what you love to do is provide the legal services and not manage, then scaling may not make sense for you. Similarly, speaking. If you are spending your time training other speakers, if you are spending your time overseeing them, if you're spending your time having to like come up with a system and a process to not only train them, but oversee them. And now you're booking more stuff, right? So you're still having to deal with, okay, I'm going to book this gig for this client and I'm going to send in this person and I'm having to manage that conversation. And I have to still handle the invoicing and I have to make sure they did a good job. You have added a lot more to your plate. It's not like you've just got more people that are out there doing it for you. You've not just cloned yourself. You're now managing more than you did before. So if what you love most is to actually do the speaking and the workshops yourself, you're not going to be able to do as much of that because you're having to manage and oversee everyone else doing their part. Similar with coaching, even the group coaching. If you don't enjoy group coaching the same way that you enjoy individual coaching, then you're not going to be getting the ability to do as much of that. And if you are having to train others to do it for you or that are in your group, you're still having to oversee them and train them. In all of these situations, you are doing more management and more supervising than you are the service itself. So why in those circumstances would we scale? Well, a lot of times it's because we have more than we can handle, or we see the opportunity to make more money because we see that the demand is greater than the supply. And we're like, well, if I bring more people in, then I can make more money. And most of us all want to make more money. Great, fabulous. What you have to do is do the math on that. You have to figure out really at the end of the day, how much money do you want to take home? And I get it. It's like, I don't know, is there a cap? A lot of us don't have a cap. We're like, I want it all. Okay, great. I love it. I want you to have it all. But you do really need to have an idea of how much you want to be able to bring home at a minimum, right? And then what's just a good marker? Like what feels really good? And so when you do that math, sometimes you can just raise your rates and still have that same take home. And I think a lot of times we get in our heads, we have to scale in order to hit those higher numbers. But again, this goes back to the margins. As you scale, you're hiring more people. You might not actually be making, like, it's going to take more to make as much personally. So if you can still make that number work in a different way, that may actually be better for you than simply growing for growth's sake, because you still may not be making as much money, or the extra money you would make, it's not worth it. Just knowing there are a lot of different ways to get to that number, and it's not always through scaling. And then sometimes, right, like it's is it worth it? Because we do always want more money, but a lot of times we also want more rest and balance and peace. And sometimes we want a lot more fun and a lot more time on our hands to go do enjoyable things. And we want the ability to travel. And so it's for high achievers, it's so easy to follow that monetary mark, but don't forget the other marks that are just as important and bring you just as much happiness and security as the money. So, the other businesses that may not want to scale are those who don't want to sell. Scaling is really a concept in businesses that are more corporate, more of a startup, where you are investing a lot and you are trying to grow it to a certain level such that you can sell it and then get a profit, get a buyout on the acquisition. A lot of service based businesses, a lot of us who started these businesses that are not startups, right? Like they're not corporate. Like we're just a small business. We're not retail. If we are not intending to actually sell the company, which means that it's mostly based on us, right? Like if we're not the one providing the service, if we're not the face of the company, do people still want it? And if the answer is no, then you're not going to sell the company. And if you're not selling the company, then scaling it actually is going to create issues when you go to retire or unwind. So, being able to keep it small, being able to keep it nimble, where you really can take off as much as you want, you have a lot of flexibility, that really lets you decide year in and year out where you want the business to go. So you could like temporarily grow it, but like you don't need it to be this big machine. Because if you have the big machine, like I was saying earlier with like moving the ship, it's actually really hard to make changes. So if you want to have autonomy and flexibility to be able to do really whatever you want to do with the business at any given time, including eventually potentially scaling it down or retiring, then you probably don't want to scale the business because it's then just going to end. And that's going to be really wonky and hard to unwind. And I'll be really interested to see where things go, like especially in the online business world, because let's be honest, it's sort of a new world. So for those that continue to grow it up and to scale and have these big teams, but they are the name, they are the face. I don't know what happens to their teams and their business unless they just shut it down one day. And a lot of us who have started these businesses, we actually enjoy providing the service and the expertise. So I don't know. If you're not looking to sell it, it may not make a ton of sense to scale. And then I'll just quickly go through the whole, like the pitfalls thing, right? Like, so if you don't want a bunch of systems, if you don't want to have operations, if you don't want to have a big team, then you probably don't want to scale. If you don't want to be the CEO and the manager and you don't have a lot of upfront money to invest in someone that you're going to trust to do that for you so that, you truly can just be part of the business, then you probably don't want to scale. And I will say, for a lot of people, it might actually make sense, especially like I'm thinking of like lawyers and others. Like sometimes it's just, it's okay. Not everyone is meant to be an entrepreneur. it's okay to go like do that at another firm or another company and let them pay you and you can take profits as a partner or whatever else. But if you're hiring someone to be the CEO and to truly run the company and let them be the CEO, which means they're the ones making the decisions. And I see a lot of entrepreneurs, they hire CEOs, but they're not really CEOs because they're still running the ship. They're still making the decisions, in which case you've got like a manager. That's not a CEO of a company because the CEO of the company is truly in charge. So if if you don't want to be like the full-time CEO manager and you don't really want to hand that over to someone else either, then maybe it's not meant to be scaled. If you don't want to lose control and autonomy and be able to make all the decisions, it probably shouldn't be scaled. If you are worried about the margins and the pressure of, constantly having to grow and to keep up, again, you probably don't want to scale. So for those who do want to scale, who should scale, right? Like, because a lot of people don't say, I want all, like, I'm cool with all those things. It's a personality thing and it's a business thing. If your dream is to grow the business such that you can sell it, such that it can run without you, such that it can be a fully run business that does not need you. Like you could totally be sick. You could be on vacation. Like you don't even care what it's actually doing. Like you can be off on vacation and like you're not going to get an email because there truly is a CEO, COO, CFO. Like you're just getting a check. Like as the owner, you're just getting a check. For some people, that sounds like a dream come true. And that is exactly who should be scaling. I have realized that's not what I want at all. But if you're listening to this and you're like, that is my dream. Like I don't want to be in the business offering the services. Like I want to be over here. And eventually I want to be able to hand my role off such that I'm still an owner because I created this thing. It's the vehicle, but I don't want actually want to be in the day to day. You are exactly who should scale. And even if you don't have a dream of selling it, but you do have the dream of like you're not even in the business and it's running without you and you're getting a paycheck, you absolutely are the perfect fit for scaling. If you actually love the CEO role, if you love the management role, if you enjoy operations, you may be a great fit for scaling, even if you're not intending to sell one day. Because again, this goes back to are you like, do you really love the service piece or do you love the management piece? And a lot of this also goes back to what you're even providing in the first place. So some entrepreneurs, they're in it for the business idea. They're in it for the possibility, whereas others just don't want to be in corporate America and they want more of that autonomy and freedom and want to do something on their own. And that really, those are two different kinds of personalities. And one business is really not meant to be scaled, and the other one totally is. So just knowing your lane and knowing why you created the business and what brings you joy in building that business is going to let you know. So if you love the systems and the operations, if you love managing and the people part, and you're a great mentor, and like you would just like you would rather do that than the actual service itself, absolutely, you have a great business intended to be scaled. Maybe the margins aren't that important. Maybe you fully understand and realize that you're going to be investing in your business. So it's a longer term play, similar to a startup where they get outside funding and maybe you get outside funding. Maybe it's your own funding, or maybe it's you just don't need as much to bring home. Then you might be like, yeah, I'm totally cool with that. I'm willing to like give up my salary and do these other things to invest in building this out because I know the long-term potential. So I'm willing to give up 5 to 10 years, right, worth of my salary in order to get this team built out so that they can run without me. And then I know on the back end, I'm either getting the money from like when I do sell it, or I'm just getting money as the owner, right? So like I'm getting the profits. So I'm totally cool with that. So just really knowing what you're needing and wanting from a financial perspective now and in the future, that will let you know if your business should be scaled or not. Similarly, some people really, really, really want to have big businesses. And they are more than happy to give up that control and that autonomy. They have a vision. They have a vision of, um, so even if it was like retail, right? So like maybe you have a vision of having like all these different salons or all of these different restaurants. Maybe you have a vision of this huge coaching company. If you have that vision, then you're going to have to scale to achieve that vision. So that's not, you're not going to have the fear and the pressure of paying everybody, because it really becomes more about the competitiveness and the desire to build this big company, as opposed to feeling the pressure of you selling enough and you delivering enough, because you've got the sales team. You've got the delivery team, right? You really are the person who's just really good at getting the right people in the right places to let them shine and do their thing. So, if those are the things that you really love, then absolutely scale that business. But again, I think a lot of people, myself included, we actually don't want to scale. We think we want to scale until we get into it. And then we're like, wait, I actually don't want to scale. I just want to do this a little bit differently. The last thing that I want to mention is the clients and the customers. I am a client and a customer of a few different people who are scaling right now. And whew, there, it's not always a pleasant experience. And if you truly are wanting to build that business, then you're not going to be as worried about it, because you don't have, like, you're not looking to build a lot of like small loyal clients. Like, you're really looking to grow it big, and you're going to lose people, and you're not as worried about those relationships, even though you should be customer focused. Like, it's part of business for you. I will tell you, I am working with someone right now where, oh, that is so over systematized. Like, it's impossible to talk to them. It's impossible to like deal with their customer support. Like, it's set up where it works for them and their team, but from a client perspective, like, it totally sucks. It's like hard to be a client of theirs. And I probably won't continue working with them long term because of that. Like, I they're not so good that I am willing to deal with the nonstop systems that they have. And it's so funny because like I remember having to do this for clients when I was getting really big and we were having to do all the systems. And it just loses that personal touch, and it becomes really cumbersome. And being on both sides of that, like, it's just part of it. And so when you're going from being something small to something big, you really can, I think, lose a lot of customers and ruin a lot of relationships in that process. So I think knowing that you want to scale from the outset is actually a really good idea, because it allows you to approach your business differently, and then you never really have to ruin that stuff from the get-go. Like, you really should be thinking of it from scaling from the start, as opposed to now I've gotten here and now I need to scale. It can just be a really, really bad experience when everything is so systematized in order to serve that many people, and you just feel like you're a number, because in many ways you are. And it's more about the business running smoothly than making sure that the client is having a smooth experience themselves. And then the other part of, from a client perspective, is when you do hire someone. Like, I'm thinking over the years, I've hired a lot of different people, whether it was a coach or a designer, and you hire them because they're great at what they do. And then you stick with them, and then they start scaling, and then they're no longer providing the service. Someone else is providing the service, and it's not as good. Right? Like, it's like that. I actually liked the person I hired. And so then it becomes, well, you're going to lose clients that way, right? Because they're going to go other places because they want you. They don't actually want other people. And that's not always the case. Sometimes you have an amazing team and people do want that. But again, that goes back to, if you know you're going to scale from the start, then you're not really relying on yourself and you're not the face of the company. If you really want to scale, I think it's more important, like, your business is going to do better long term if the brand is a company brand, not a personal brand. So in many ways, the question becomes like, do you want to be an agency? And that's like, regardless, right? If whether you are a lawyer, whether you are a designer, or you own a salon, or you're a coach, or you're a speaker, all these things. The question really becomes, do you want to be an agency? If it's service, do you want to be an agency or do you want to be boutique? And only you can answer that. There is not a right or a wrong. Only you can answer that. But I do think it's really important to know that if you try to move from boutique to agency, which is the whole scaling concept, that's when shit can go awry. So the quicker you know what you want on the back end, then the easier you can set things up such that you don't have to have a lot of those growing pains within your company, yourself, and your clients. Like it's just really, really clear from the get-go. But that's why it is always so important to be so clear on your vision for the business. As the business owner, you have to know why you are starting the business, what you want out of the business. And it can't just be like, what's the monetary goal? What's the, right? Like it's why do you want the business? Do you want to retire with it one day? Do you only want it for 5 years? Is it a legacy? Do you want it to continue beyond you, right? But beyond your retirement, beyond your death? Like, what does the business mean for you? Why do you want it? And if you have a very clear vision of not, oh, I want this to be an agency or, oh, I want this to be a boutique, but the vision for what it gives you, like what feeling does it give you? How is it going to give back to you? If you know what it's fulfilling for you, then it's very easy for you to then say, what makes sense for my business short-term and long-term? And if you don't have a clear vision of what the business means to you and why you're doing it to begin with, then it's going to be so easy to chase those outside markers and find yourself scaling a business that you never meant to scale, or never scaling it when that was actually what you should have been doing all along because you had something different in mind. So I hope this has been helpful. I hope you have a better idea of whether or not scaling is right for you, and you can let go of some of those ideas of scaling, or you can really double down and start getting on it now, early on in your business, because you know that's eventually where you want to go. And yeah, just get really, really clear on that vision. All right. I wish you all the success in whatever business it is that you grow, and I will be back next week. Thank you so much for joining me for this week's podcast. If you're watching on YouTube, give the episode a like and leave a comment below so we can keep the conversation going. Also, be sure to subscribe to the channel so you never miss a future episode or announcement. Listening on Apple, Spotify, or another podcast app, you can watch the video and join in the after show conversation by visiting hustleandflowpodcast.com.